This episode is brought to you by Nespresso Virtual Coffee Machines. Ready to enjoy the bold flavors of barista-quality Nespresso iced coffee at home? Simply fill a glass with ice and press the brew button on your virtual pop machine to enjoy rich double espressos roasted to stand up even when chilled. Refreshingly bold iced coffee. Refreshingly easy to make at home. Visit Nespresso.com to shop now.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Welcome to Fortune's Wheel Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan. This is our 5th episode in our brand new series exploring the foundations of medieval philosophy, beginning long before there was any sense of what we call today Western civilization. I humbly ask you all to share the show with others and let them know about our new series on philosophy that will be running alongside our medieval story episodes. Also, if you wouldn't mind giving a 5-star and written review on your chosen podcast platform, it does wonders for catapulting shows like this one to reach the homepages of potential listeners. And if you're looking to contribute to the numerous paywalls and books needed to bring you a great show, please consider donating on the Buy Me a Coffee app or website. The link's in the show notes. Now, there are specific points we will make on this episode that I hope will expand our understanding of not only Plato's evolution as a trailblazing Western thinker, but they will also expand our own understanding of how we view our world. Plato provides us with a framework with which to accurately place ourselves into the broader context of society, and this framework will influence nearly every Western philosopher after him. More importantly, for the context of this podcast, this framework will directly influence Christian thinking throughout the Middle Ages, providing a structure, specifically ethical and political structures, with which medieval philosophers and rulers will work within. On this episode, we will hit on the following ideas. Socrates' death. It changed everything. The soul in the city. They're basically the same thing. Justice is balance. Are democracies destined to fail? So with all that in mind, let's go back to where it all started. With a prison cell, some hemlock in a cup, and the moment Plato realized he had a mission, and maybe even a score to settle. This is Philosophy Episode 5, entitled Plato's Triad, Soul, Society, and Virtue. Thank you for your support, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. Socrates. Yes. It all goes back to Socrates. You know the scene by now. Prison cell. Several men gathered in support of their beloved teacher. An old man smiling in the corner. A cup of hemlock. Time passes, painfully slow. The old man stumbles. He's gently lowered to the floor. Within an hour, his lungs cease to breathe, and he is dead. Later that day, Plato receives guests in his bedroom. These guests were a few of the men who just witnessed the death of Socrates. They all surely wept together, especially Plato. He was too ill to be there. They sat in silent weeping for a long while, until one of the men, maybe even Plato himself, began giggling. Nervous glances around to find who did it. Soon they all began giggling, quite guiltily at first, but soon the room erupted in teary-eyed laughter until another asked the group what they were all laughing about. And the man recalled Socrates saying, quote, "The true philosopher makes dying his concern," end quote. It's not recorded what the reaction to this was exactly, but if I were there, I would have been the giggling buffoon off to the side who interrupted the silence with, "Well, he nailed it then." Dark times require dark humor, I guess. Socrates' death was not just a personal tragedy for Plato, but also a turning point in his life. It's said to have disillusioned him with Athenian democracy, given how it treated one of its wisest citizens. Well, according to the Oracle of Delphi, the wisest man in the world. This disillusionment would later influence Plato's political philosophy, especially in his work, The Republic, where he sketches out an ideal state ruled by philosopher-kings. Let's pump the brakes a bit, though. This whole idea needs some context before we launch right into it. Now, as we get into Plato's ethics, we completely miss the mark if we didn't remind ourselves about his concept of the form of the good, which is the highest and most important form, illuminating all other forms and representing ultimate truth, like capital T truth, and goodness and reality. But Plato didn't just leave the good floating up in the intelligible sky like some divine screensaver, bouncing from side to side. He wanted the good to actually matter to us down here, where we live and breathe and argue about what's for dinner. So he mapped this cosmic ideal, again, the form of the good, quite literally, onto the human soul itself. Enter Plato's Tripartite Soul. Now, Plato divided the human soul into three distinct parts: logos, thymos, and epithemia, like a dysfunctional family constantly bickering over the steering wheel. Now, logos translates to reason, which is supposed to seek the good, guided by experience, wisdom, and truth. Now, it's worth mentioning, side note, that in ancient Greek, logos was the word used for both speaking and thinking. Greeks, like Plato, saw no real inherent difference in the two ideas, thinking and speaking. Keep that in mind going forward, as it's subtle, but it's very often overlooked as a concept in philosophy and Christian theology, this word logos. Now, thymos translates to spirit, which is the passionate or spirited part of our souls that drives ambition, honor, and emotions, like courage or anger. It's linked to warriors and guardians who strive for glory and to defend justice, who live by the honor code. We all have it, but Plato said that the spirit is more prevalent in folks like warriors and protectors. And then the third, epithemia, which translates to appetite or desire. Well, this is the basest part of our soul that governs physical desires, such as hunger, lust, and other material needs. It's associated with the working class, as it seeks pleasure and bodily satisfaction, as well as those day-to-day whims. Now, Plato argued that a just individual, therefore a just society, maintains a harmony between these three parts. But he stressed a necessary hierarchy within us that must be constantly, like minute by minute, maintained. Of these three, logos, or reason, should be most prominent. After logos, thymos, or spirit, which should support logos in providing the drive to maintain and then improve oneself. And with reason and spirit in total control, these two will keep epithemia, again, appetite and desire, in check. This balance reflects his ideal human soul, and beyond this, as insinuated earlier, it also reflects Plato's ideal society as well. Plato's ideal political system was one in which philosophers should rule, warriors should enforce order, and producers should provide for society. In the Republic, Book 4, Plato connects the tripartite soul of the individual to the tripartite soul of the city. He explains that reason is akin to philosophers, which he describes as rulers who govern with wisdom and objective truth. The spirit are called auxiliaries, which describes warriors, right, who help to enforce order and protect the city. And as for desire, he likens this idea to what he calls producers, who are workers who provide for material needs of the city itself. All three, Plato argues, are absolutely essential for a society to run smoothly and successfully. A just city, in other words, is when philosophers lead, warriors enforce law and order, and workers provide and obey. But as we know, it's easy for producers and warriors to want to rule from time to time. History's full of those instances. But he returns to the idea of balance. If a just city hinges on balance and harmony between the three, who then should rule? Again, Plato's answer? Only those who truly love wisdom. The philosopher-kings, that is. Now, could producers and warriors become philosophers? Absolutely. No one said they couldn't. But they must come by their wisdom honestly and through great effort, like everyone else. Thus, in Plato's view, the individual reflects society. That is, the tripartite soul reflects the tripartite city. It's not that he believes the individual should reflect society. Rather, it's inescapable that individuals reflect their society. Makes one think about our current state of things, actually. We can all agree there's some disconnect in our societies today, speaking as a Westerner anyway. I wonder if we took a closer look at all the individuals that make up our societies in the West, if we will see the same disconnects in Plato's tripartite soul hierarchy that we see at the societal level. What's more is that I wonder if we really took a look at our leaders, if we would classify them as philosophers or not. And not just in some classical sense of the word, but as simply the wisest among us who are in leadership positions. Just something we should all chew on, I guess. Now, zoom out. Now, go with me on this. Zoom out. Ethics, to Plato, isn't just about doing good things. It's about aligning your soul with ultimate reality, the reality outside the cave. That is, the form of the good. Follow me here, because this is really where the rubber meets the road with Plato. If the individual soul needs harmony to be just, then what about a whole city? Plato didn't see much difference between the individual soul and the soul of a city. In fact, he builds his ideal city in the Republic as a mirror of the soul. Reason becomes the ruling class, the philosophers, right? Spirit, well, that's the auxiliaries, the warriors who protect and defend and keep the order. And desire, well, that's everybody else, the producers, the merchants, the hungry mob, etc. You know what? Here's a simple way for you to remember it. In Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings trilogy, you've got Frodo, Samwise, and Gollum, for instance. Three major characters, Frodo being the protagonist, right? Well, Frodo represents reason. Samwise represents spirit. And Gollum represents desire. Now, if justice in the soul is each part doing its job under the guidance of reason, well, justice in the city works the same way. The problem? In real life, the reason rarely gets the keys to the city. Instead, desire grabs the wheel. Spirit gets drunk on pride in the passenger seat, and reason is tossed in the trunk. And Plato knew this wasn't just abstract theory. He lived it. So stop and think about what Plato's driving at here. His teacher was killed by democracy. No, really. Because of this, Plato became an intensely bitter enemy of democratic Athens. Democracy to Plato was a system that allowed for the entrance of toxicity and corruption into a society's leadership. To him, ambition was fine, but there were very few, if any, safeguards against ambitious incompetence or even just plain greedy people. I stopped myself at this moment and really wrestled with a few things. I mean, I get where Plato's coming from, but one of the founders of what we call Western civilization is also at odds with democracy. Well, of course, as an American, despite what government-funded public schooling teaches our children, we do not live in a democracy. It's a representative republic. but it has democratic ideals pumping through its veins. Between representative republicanism and capitalism, warts and all, believe me, there are plenty of warts, I can't think of a single other system that's allowed for more social mobility, lifted more people out of poverty, and protected the inherent rights of every individual. Sure, there are certainly problems, but the systems themselves aren't the problems. I'll stand confidently by that opinion too. So how can I square the circle between what I politically believe and what Plato believed? Well, the first thing to consider is that Plato was diagnosing. He wasn't prescribing. Plato's Republic isn't a blueprint for government so much as a philosophical thought experiment. He's asking a question. What would a perfectly just society look like from the ground up? He's not necessarily trying to tell the Athenians, and thus those alive today, to go crown a philosopher and shut down the agora. His criticism of democracy, specifically Athenian democracy, is deeply personal and contextual. He watched the democratic mob execute Socrates, his mentor, for the quote-unquote crime of asking too many questions. So yeah, he's a little bitter. Plato didn't experience the American Revolution or anything. He experienced a chaotic free-for-all where passions ruled and wisdom got booed off the stage. Twitter. He basically witnessed Twitter play out in real life. Next, his idea of the philosopher-king is less about establishing an intellectual oligarchy and more about ensuring that those in charge are actually competent, rational, objective, and aiming, this is key, aiming at the good. Not ambition, not greed, not public opinion polls. In terms of modern representative government, you and me, we also want our leaders to be educated, experienced, and, well, ideally, we want them wise. A good republic isn't mob rule. It's mediated democracy. It has checks and balances, even regulations, precisely because people like Plato warned us about what happens when desire takes the wheel and reason is tossed in the trunk. The tripartite soul, as it turns out, is actually compatible with republicanism. And just to clarify the waters, I'm not talking about political parties when I say republicanism. In a constitutional republic, reason rules through institutions, legislatures, courts, laws, etc. Spirit is present in national pride, civic duty, and military service. And desire, well, it's channeled through capitalism and free, or very carefully regulated, markets. The system tries, albeit imperfectly, to balance all three. In other words, a republic is a messy but ingenious attempt to structure the tripartite soul into a political order. It accepts that people are flawed, so it sets up rules and incentives to contain the appetites and elevate reason without demanding a philosopher-king, though we'd all want one. Now, in Book 7 of the Republic, Plato warns us that governments degenerate in a predictable pattern. We're starting with this ideal state here. So first, he says there's an aristocracy, which is a pretty bad word these days, I will admit that, and rightfully so. But to Plato, this merely meant that the wisest among them were ruling the state. The aristocracy, to him, was the philosopher-king, or at least a field of philosopher-kings to choose from. And those who rule through a wisdom had not only their own ultimate good in mind, but everyone else's as well. But once a philosopher-king is cast aside, the moment it happens, once reason is cast aside, well, spirit takes over, resulting in what's called a timocracy. Now, it's not, a governmental system ruled by people named Tim. That'd be interesting to see. No, these rulers, of course, are the warriors mentioned earlier. These warriors are honor-driven, which is a very self-centered thing, for better and for worse. And once warriors gain power, more worldly things are valued, such as fame and money. This will inevitably devolve into an oligarchy, which literally translates to rule by the rich. And it's the wealthy who dominate society, allowing corruption to set in. Now, after the rich have a crack at it, the not wealthy will eventually rise up against that, and they will create a democracy, which to Plato meant rule by desire. Now, we know what it literally translates to, but Plato really thought it was rule by desire. And here's where we really see Plato's thoughts about democracy shine. Plato likens those ruling in a democracy to the basest part of the tripartite soul, the part of the soul that needed to be put on a short leash and controlled at all times. He saw democracy as the unwise and the irrational, being able to do whatever they wanted with no discipline. Interesting take on democracy, isn't it? Could it be tainted by the Athenian democracy irrationally order his teacher to either leave or commit suicide? You better believe it. But from a democracy will always, in Plato's estimation, always emerge one quote-unquote strongman who creates what he calls a tyranny, a one-man rule that ignores all rights and privileges one formerly was given or were protected by government. So aristocracy, timocracy, oligarchy, democracy, tyranny. This was how Plato saw government, and it wasn't flattering at all. It sounds depressingly inevitable, doesn't it? But I've learned to read it as a cautionary tale, not a prophecy. It's like a priest or pastor saying, this is what happens when you allow sin to decide your fate. X, Y, and Z will happen, right? Modern republics, like the one in the United States, for instance, is by no means a perfect response to Plato's warning, but it does seek to break the old philosopher's cycle with constitutions, free press, at least in idea, it's a free press, civic education, and protected, not granted, protected inherent individual rights. The very fact that the American system, as well as other Western systems similar to this one, even tries to resist tyranny through these means is a nod to Plato's warning to us all. Now it's worth mentioning, though, that some scholars argue that the Republic isn't a political manifesto at all. It's actually an allegory for the soul. You know how Plato loves his allegories. The city is just a metaphor blown up to scale, right? If that's true, Plato isn't telling us how to govern others. He's telling us how to govern ourselves. In this light, there's no need to crown some philosopher-king. We just need to make sure our inner reason is in charge of our inner mob. So if you're like me and you enjoy the benefits and challenges that representative republicanism offers, Plato is not our political enemy. He's like our pessimistic uncle who's convinced the world's going to hell because no one reads books anymore. We don't have to accept his entire system, but we should take his diagnoses seriously. After all, he's not necessarily wrong about what happens when reason is shoved in the trunk.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there's one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Hey, this is Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast, here to help you make the most of your summer with Michelob Ultra, a superior light beer worth playing for. Play for it with the guys when you're competing to see who can sink more birdies on the golf course, because winning tastes even better with Ultra on the line. Play for Ultra. Fill your fridge with Michelob Ultra this summer. Enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2025 Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Now, just as the well-ordered soul is ruled by reason, supported by spirit, and disciplined in desire, the just city reflects that same internal architecture, just on a grander scale. Rulers should govern with wisdom, warriors should uphold order, and producers should practice moderation while they make this whole thing work. All of these working together in harmony. But Plato wasn't just building a city for fun here. This isn't Sim City with togas, you know? The whole point of structuring soul and society in this way is to cultivate virtue, both in individuals and across society. Because for Plato, justice isn't just a political arrangement or a legal code. It's a moral condition, the very state of being in which all parts do their proper work under the guidance of the good. So if you've got a just city and you've got a just soul, then what's really holding it all together? That's where we turn next. The virtues. The deep ethical glue that binds soul, society, and the search for the good. So what is virtue? Or as Plato would have called it, arete. Remember, virtue means excellent, not just moral goodness, but living in accordance with one's nature. Now, Plato's ideas about virtue is teleological. What does that mean? The Greek word telos means purpose. So if something is teleological, then it stems a priori from the idea that everyone has a purpose. So according to Plato, given that everyone has a purpose in life, then virtue can be defined as the fulfillment of that purpose. Plato writes in the Republic, Book 1, quote, "The virtue of anything will be what enables it to perform its function well." End quote. I'm not old school moralizing here, and neither was Plato. Rather, Plato wants us to know that virtue's pretty awesome, actually. In fact, virtue is human flourishing. It's an inner order that we can reach. It's existential alignment with the cosmos itself. He then goes on to list in the Republic, Book 4, 4 different virtues, each one grounded in the tripartite soul, and by extension, as you can probably guess, the tripartite city. Now, the first virtue he attaches is to reason, and he called it, unsurprisingly, wisdom. Wisdom, he defines, is knowledge of the good, as well as the ability to make just decisions on behalf of the individual. Remember, these are the rulers, the philosopher-kings, and in order to lead, in Plato's view, one must have wisdom. The second virtue he attaches to spirit, and he called it courage. He defines courage as a steadfastness in the face of fear and the sticking to a belief in what's right and what is just. Remember, these are the warriors in society who are tasked with keeping order, and it takes courage to maintain order. Now, the third virtue he attaches to desire, and he called it moderation. Moderation is defined as a harmony between all parts, characterized by self-restraint and balance. There's that word balance again. These are the producers in a larger society: farmers, merchants, fishermen, artisans, etc. And in order to keep oneself on the right track, one must be able to control one's impulses and desires. But this fourth one is a bit different. Plato believed in a fourth virtue he called justice. But instead of being attached to one part of the tripartite soul, like the other three, one can only reach and maintain justice when each part of the soul is doing its job and not meddling in others' roles. And in terms of society at large, he writes, quote unquote, justice is doing one's own work and not meddling with what isn't one's own. I like that just on its own personally. So he gives us 4 virtues: wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice. But these are simply aims. Remember, he said that virtues are the product of the harmony within a soul or a city. Well, none of us are perfect. So where are we if we haven't quite attained these virtues? Plato has an answer to that as well. If virtue is a condition of harmony, then what's its opposite? He called it vice. And vice represents disorder within a soul or a city. What does this disorder look like? Well, he says when desire leads, then you get nothing but greed, gluttony, and tyranny. When spirit rules, you get arrogance, blind obedience, and unearned honor or fame. So when reason is not in control, simply put, disorder in whatever form is inevitable, says Plato. He also says that the soul of the tyrant is enslaved by unrestrained desire, which is the very opposite of virtue. And this begs the question, what would Plato feel about today's follow your heart messages cruising around schools and social media and entertainment? Well, following our hearts is akin to following our basest part of our soul, desire. If we follow our hearts, then reason is simply not in control. And Plato would have a serious issue with that, wouldn't he? In fact, as he laid it out earlier, one can easily conclude that Plato would think that follow your heart equates to greed, gluttony, and tyranny of the soul as well as the society. I'm just laying it out there. I'll let you decide if he's correct or not. Now, beyond that, Plato uses Socrates to lay out some of these ideas about virtues in works like Meno and Protagoras, in which Socrates pushes the idea that virtue is the knowledge that the good exists and can describe the good. Essentially, Plato says that to know the good is to do the good. I'm not saying it's correct, but that is the Platonic framework. He firmly believed that no one willingly chooses evil, that all wrongdoing is rooted in ignorance of the good. In Protagoras, Plato writes, quote unquote, no one errs willingly. If one knows the good, then it's impossible, he says, to act contrary to that. Again, I'm not sure about that one, but it's an interesting idea to kind of ponder nonetheless. Besides, in the context of Christian and medieval philosophy, which is what's important for the show here, well, it reminds me an awful lot of Jesus' prayer to God as he hangs on the cross, pleading, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. So if he's saying that wrongdoing, dare I say, even evil itself, is less about malicious intent and more about ignorance of the good, then how can people reach virtue? Think about the allegory of the cave. One person broke his chains, walked outside to a higher reality where he was able to witness the form of the good, only to come back and try to convince others to do the same. Now, Plato didn't believe that people stumble into virtue. They have to be educated, formed, molded, shaped. He thought that it takes everyone to make sure everyone else is living in harmony with their tripartite soul. It was a community effort. And the result is not only a community of harmonious souls, but also a harmonious society as a whole. Societies need wise, courageous, and productive people living in moderation at all levels for it to find its harmony. He writes in the Republic, quote unquote, until philosophers rule as kings, or those who are now called kings and leading men genuinely and adequately philosophize, until that, cities will have no rest from evils. So I suppose the allegory of the cave, which is, again, located in Book 7 of the Republic, really boils down to one ultimate lesson. Liberation is found only through virtue. The cave itself represents his most base desires, and he is a prisoner to his appetites, to watching shadows on a wall, tricking him into complacency. He's a prisoner stuck within desire, but he breaks his chains and he heads out, and this takes great courage in doing so. One of his first instincts is to go back and help those still chained inside their own caves of desire. Not only is this courageous, but it also shows a sense of guardianship toward others. He's driven by his spirit, by his passion to help others, to restore order, of course. Again, akin to spirit within the tripartite soul. Once he beholds the truth, beauty, the forms of everything in existence, especially the form of the good, he can't wait to tell others. What's more important, though, is his newfound understanding of the form of the good. Having seen the capital T truth and the ultimate capital G good for everyone, he becomes wise. As you can see, Plato's allegory of the cave is more than what it seems on the surface. It encapsulates the journey we all must take to transform ourselves from a slave to our basest desires into a life of harmony and virtue. Plato's telling us, veiled in his brilliant allegory and weaved in and out of many of his writings, he's telling us, he's pleading with us to understand that true virtue isn't just ethical. True virtue is ontological. That is, it changes the way we see reality. Just like the tripartite soul is made up of reason, spirit, and desire, just like the Tripartite City mirrors this with the philosopher-king, the guardians, and the producers, so too do virtues align with each one to form a triad that seeks harmony. Through the centuries, Plato's still pleading with us. You must order your inner world to understand and transform the outer one. And only by pursuing the good can either be just. So, that was a lot. To sum it all up here, Socrates' death changed everything. It's worth repeating. Plato wasn't just mourning his teacher. He was rethinking everything about politics, justice, and even truth. If democracy could kill the wisest man in Athens, maybe democracy had a few flaws. Next, Plato concluded that the human soul and the human society are basically the same, at least in its architectural structures and necessities for a hierarchy for it to function properly. He argued that a well-ordered person has reason in charge, spirit as their noble enforcer of order, and desire under strict, disciplined control. A well-ordered city, same deal. Wise rulers, courageous warriors, and hardworking, disciplined citizens, all playing their proper roles. One is not better or worse than the other, but they do have their proper roles. Whether in your soul or in society, justice happens when every part is in its rightful place in the hierarchy. And when that balance tips away from the reason, spirit, desire, order, well, welcome to tyranny, welcome corruption, and welcome general disaster for all involved. Essentially, an honorable, fair, and orderly society begins with the wise, courageous, and disciplined individual. And when it comes to rulers, the reason portion of the hierarchy, Plato thinks that the only good rulers are the ones who don't want to rule. The wisest among us know that leadership is insanely difficult and comes with a target on one's back. Therefore, in his estimation, these are the only people worthy of doing the job, what he calls the philosopher-king. And back to democracy, Plato had thoughts on democracy. obviously, and he wasn't a big fan. He saw democracy as being led by the whims of mob emotions, not by wise, just, and impartial rule. Therefore, democracy was merely a stepping stone to tyranny, because the unwise majority would eventually trade freedom for security. Sound familiar? Now, this decline of states just shows us how fragile justice can actually be. In order to preserve justice, we must move beyond emotion and rhetoric to philosophical reasoning. So I'd like to leave it here with a question, a chance to reflect on ourselves and our societies, wherever you may live. Are we closer to reason leading us today? Or have we fallen into Plato's inevitable cycle of political decay, an imbalance in either spirit or desire ruling the day? I'd love to hear from you. Until next time.